everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Making History. My name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we're the Hesses. And we are back.
We're... What? I tried to say, here we are. But it didn't come out right.
Here we are. We were out of town for a couple of days.
We were. It was super fun.
Very fun. Very last minute trip.
Yes. Yeah. So circumstances of why we went weren't necessarily great for all parties involved.
Yeah.
My brother had to evacuate his home because of the hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
Or the hurricane, I guess I should say.
In Florida.
In Florida. And so they ended up in South Carolina with my sister. And they said, hey, why don't you guys come up? And we'll make it a big family sleepover.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of dropped everything. And
yeah. Well, thankfully it was the perfect week.
It was.
Because the previous couple of weeks, I probably wouldn't have gone.
Right.
And if it was this week, at the very least, I probably wouldn't have gone again because we've got our fall festival.
Right.
Would have
been sad to miss that.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, it just happened to be the 1 week that we didn't have any like major commitments.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so we were like, yeah.
Here we come.
Here we come.
Yep. Not a lot of sleep involved.
No.
But like not because people weren't sleeping well, just because everybody was staying up so late.
Yeah. We were up till at least 1 every night.
Yeah. And then my sister and I stayed up until like 3:30 one night talking. And both of us the next morning were like, whoa.
Yeah.
We're tired.
Yep.
We're too old to be staying up this late.
No. I know. I'm just not built for that anymore.
No. Yeah. It's crazy thinking back, like when we were dating, we would stay up that late regularly.
Yeah.
Like it was weird if we weren't up that late.
Right.
For a while.
Well, 'cause when we started dating, you were in a musical and you would have practice or rehearsal pretty much every day until...
Yeah, every day until like 11 o'clock.
Yeah. So you would come over to the cabin at like 11.
Yeah.
And so we would do homework and whatever else.
Yep. Yeah. Whatever else.
Happened.
Wink.
Yeah. But yeah, I stay up late now and I feel awful the next day.
Yeah.
So that was super fun.
Yeah.
I found some new music that I like. And on the way home from South Carolina, it's because it takes us, the directions, the maps say about 6 hours. With kids, it takes us, 7.5, probably.
7.5.
And so at what point, and of course, we have kids who don't really sleep in the car.
Yeah. If you have secrets, please tell us of how to get your kids to sleep in the car because they just won't.
Well, our 6-year-old, pretty much since she was maybe 2, 3, maybe.
I feel like even earlier than that.
Maybe earlier.
Because remember the one time that we went to South Carolina and she was like 7 months old and she pretty much stayed awake the entire drive.
I do remember that. So she's almost never slept in the car. Yeah. And even to this day, like if we go to Florida or South Carolina, which is like maybe 7.5, maybe 10 hours to Florida, like most of the time she just won't sleep for a minute. And our 3-year-old is the same.
Yeah.
Isabel just won't really sleep.
And the thing is like they're content.
Yeah, yeah.
And they're happy.
They're
fine.
happy. They do great.
An amazing job for being up the entire time. But I feel like in my mind, I'm like, just go to sleep.
I would give anything.
I want to sleep. You go to sleep.
Yeah.
So funny.
But on the way back, amazingly, Nora did fall asleep for a little bit, which was like shocking because that never happens.
Yeah. I remember when I turned around, I was like, this is real.
Yeah.
She's actually sleeping in the car.
Yeah. So at one point, she slept for a little bit. You were sleeping. Ollie was sleeping.
Yeah.
Izzy was awake, but probably watching a movie or something.
Yeah.
And so I put on, and it's Lord of the Rings soundtrack, but it's like a lo-fi version. And there's only, I think, 5 songs. Okay. And so it's not like a full soundtrack. There's only 5 songs. Yeah. And each song is short, but I listened to it for probably an hour and a half at least.
It is quite nice.
It is one of the most pleasant things. If I remember, I'll put a link in our show notes or something like that. It is one of the most pleasant things to listen to.
Yeah. If you're nerdy about Lord of the Rings like us, you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, we do like Lord of the Rings. All right, let's continue talking about the gospel.
Let's do it.
So last week, we kind of brought up how, like, I've noticed this trend, and I mentioned that we've been guilty of this too, but as I go on social media and I look at what, like, parenting accounts are saying, and what kind of advice they're offering, it's all good and it's all true, but I don't find that a lot of people are offering a real solution to the problem.
Right.
So the problems that are most evident with parenting are, like, parents don't have self-control, and they expect the kids to have self-control, but they don't have it themselves.
Right.
And the kids they get angry and they get frustrated and they throw tantrums, as they ought to, because they're kids.
Right.
But often as parents, like, the problem is that when my kids get frustrated, I get frustrated. Or when they get emotionally escalated, I get emotionally escalated.
Sure.
And so a lot of the advice is like, well, you need to be calm. You need to be gentle. You need to have self-control. You need to be able to regulate your emotions.
Yep.
It's like, yeah, that's all true, but I can't seem to just do it.
Right. Or I can for about 2 minutes and then I just unravel all over again. Yeah.
Yeah. You and I have been on this journey for, I don't know, many years now of really trying to understand the gospel, because as it turns out, we had gone most of our lives without ever really hearing the gospel.
Right.
Which is a bummer, because we both grew up in church.
Right. So you'd think that would be like baseline. Like,
right.
This is what everything else is founded upon, which is the intention.
Right.
Behind, what I feel like Jesus did. But
yeah,
so I think we just sort of missed it or weren't taught correctly, or
I'm inclined to think that, and this is because for the last several years, I have paid attention, and there's just a lot about the gospel that's missing. Now, what is often being presented or taught in churches is not untrue as much as it's incomplete.
Sure, yeah.
The gospel for most people has kind of been boiled down to, you're bad, Jesus is good, he died, so you can go to heaven.
Right.
And there's not a lot of hope for, like, experiencing any real transformation right now.
Yeah.
For most people, they're either waiting for the rapture, which I don't really think is even in the Bible anywhere.
Sure.
So maybe that's another conversation for another time. But they're either waiting to die, to be transformed and experience freedom, or they're waiting for Jesus to come and rapture them away from this horrible, awful place.
Yep. And until then, they're just, low life.
Yep.
Scum of the earth. Woe is me people.
Yes. Yeah. But one of the problems that we see with this gospel message that is being preached, and, we do have a lot of international listeners. So I'm going to say, for the sake of our listeners, that we're speaking primarily about, like, Western American churches.
Yeah.
Because I can't really speak for the rest of the world.
Right.
I hope they're doing better than we are.
Yeah.
But basically, what the church has done, it has eliminated discipleship, specifically discipleship to Jesus, and it has elevated the value for just conversion.
Yeah. It is amazing the amount of things that have been skewed over the years, that it's like, wait, okay, the word is over here, and somehow we ended up way over here. So how can we get back to, following actually what Jesus wants us to do?
So here's what's interesting, is that in the New Testament, the word Christian is used 3 times, and the word disciple is used 269 times.
Wow.
And Christian was a term that people, it wasn't even originally the idea to be called Christians, but it was this term that people were using to mock the early church because it means little Christ. And it was actually, it was meant to be like this thing of mockery. But some of the early church were like, actually, we kind of like that.
Yeah.
And so they took it on.
Okay.
But Jesus never preached conversion to Christianity. He preached discipleship to a way of life.
Yeah.
And that's what's missing, is that we have forsaken discipleship to Jesus for the sake of conversion to this like consumer Christianity that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And because of that, the church has lost its power. The church has lost its influence.
Yeah.
The church has become very assimilated to the ways of the world. And, you know, there was this study done by a professor, Michael Zigarelli, and he was a professor at Charleston Southern University School of Business.
Okay.
And he conducted what he called the Obstacles of Growth survey, in which he surveyed over 20,000 Christians around the globe. And he basically found that Christians were assimilating to the ways of the world, which is like busy, hurried, distracted. And because of that, God was becoming more marginalized in our lives. And because when he becomes more marginalized, we become more susceptible to assimilating to the ways of the world, in which he begins to be more marginalized. And it's this kind of ongoing cycle. And it's really unfortunate that there has been this lack of responsibility for discipleship in the church. And at the end of the day, coming kind of full circle to even the reason we brought this up is that there are so many things that people often want to see changed about themselves, about their lives. They want to see change in their behavior. They want to see change in their mental health, their physical health, their emotional health, their spiritual health. And each of those parts of our lives are made whole by discipleship to Jesus and understanding his truth and his way. Because, right, he says, I'm the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life.
Yeah.
And people often want the life that he purchased for us. But if you want the life that Jesus had and that he desires for us, you need to understand his truth. You need to understand his ways.
Right. Yeah. And follow in those ways rather than just saying like, okay, I'm going to follow Jesus. I accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior. But I don't actually want to change anything about the way that I'm living.
Right.
So how do I get from like point A to Z without all the other letters? And that's just impossible. You can't attain a way of living without practicing the way.
Right.
Like, or you can't attain the benefits from a certain way of living without practicing.
Right.
Is a better way to say it. Yeah, it's just impossible. You can't reach something that you're going for without those little steps first. And I think people often forsake those small baby steps at the beginning of like, okay, I genuinely have to practice this and I have to be bad at it first before I'm good at it.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating coming from a person who likes to be good at, I like to be good at the things that I do. And often, which I think, you can say, everybody can say that. But I have in the past had a habit of just being like, well, I'm not good at that. I'm not even going to try it, but that leads to not experiencing so many joys that I could potentially experience by just giving myself a little grace along the way. And so it's the same when we're following Jesus. We can't expect to all of a sudden, go from living in the ways of the world to living perfectly in the way that Jesus did overnight just because we accepted him into our hearts.
Yeah.
Like that's step one. Absolutely. But then we have to look to him. We have to learn everything about him.
Yeah.
And understand why he did what he did.
Yeah.
Why he loved the way that he loved, how he loved the way that he loved. And so that we can mirror and reflect him in our lives for everybody around us.
Yeah. And there is practicality to this that we can, I think in the coming episodes, we can offer some of the practical ways even we've learned to just to be discipled by Jesus.
Yeah.
Because there's this quote from this guy, Chris Cruz, and I've used this quote for years. And he said that if you are not intentionally being discipled by Jesus, you are unintentionally being discipled by the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're going to start pursuing the life that Jesus has for us,
Mm-hmm.
a life of rest, a life of love, a life of peace, a life of joy, a life of simplicity, if we're going to pursue that kind of life, like you said, we're going to have to start taking baby steps at practicing the ways of Jesus.
Yeah.
And it's not often things that come naturally to us.
No.
Because we have become very assimilated to a world that values busyness, it values hurry, it values instant gratification.
Yep.
And so it's going to take a lot of retraining our minds
Mm-hmm.
and retraining our bodies even to just to exist in a different way
Right.
than we're used to existing.
Yep. Yeah.
But just going back to this, the overall topic of the gospel, I think that for most people, when we talk about the gospel typically centers around Calvary, right? And there's maybe some talk about the life of Jesus, but mostly it's about his death and his resurrection.
Yeah.
Because it is, and honestly, like even Paul uses language of like, we've been co-crucified and co-resurrected with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is the reality that when you receive Christ and when you allow him to be your savior, there is this thing where like your old nature is put to death and it is crucified and you are co-resurrected with him with a new nature.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't find that the gospel story necessarily begins with Jesus and his life and his death. I think we have to go back to the garden, actually, the Garden of Eden.
Sure.
Because there's a lot of talk about what we're saved from. Primarily, we are saved from sin, which I think to some people that may mean different things.
Yeah.
We're saved from sin, but yet we still do sin. And so we have to unpack the different steps that come along with that. And I think maybe last week we mentioned this, but like upon justification, when you are first saved, you are saved from the penalty of sin. But then most people notice that not everything in their life changes.
Right. Yep. It's not all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I never sin. I never have temptation to sin.
Yep.
Yeah. It's still there.
Yep.
Unfortunately.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in that moment, you are made new and you are given a new nature. But the thing is that your mind is not renewed in that instant. And so you still have old ways and patterns and habits of thinking and feeling and acting. And those are the things that require discipline to retrain.
Right.
Anyways, back to the garden. I was saying that most people are familiar with what we're saved from, and that we're saved from death. We're saved from sin. We're saved from eternal separation from God. But there's not as much talk about what we're saved to, which I think is something that, like, that's kind of where the fun part comes in.
Yeah.
But we are saved to the life that he always intended us to live. And so when you look back to the garden pre-fall, you get a glimpse of the Lord's intention, and that his intention was for us to be the one part of creation that bore his image,
Right.
that we would be his representatives, and that we would co-reign with him, with his delegated authority here on the earth, so that we would help him make this place, this earth, look like his kingdom.
Right.
That was his plan.
Yeah.
If you read the story, things go sideways for a while. Jesus comes on the scene and he's like, I'm going to restore the potential for you to be who I always designed and dreamed for you to be. And that's the thing, is he restored the potential. And the thing about the Lord is, like, he is not obligated to fulfill our potential for us.
Right.
And so he said, in me, everything is new. Everything is different. The way the whole world functions is different because of his death and his resurrection and his ascension.
Yeah.
But again, most people, most Christians are not experiencing the fullness of the new life that Jesus purchased for us. And it's because we've not put enough emphasis on discipleship to him and to his teachings and to his ways.
Yeah.
And so you have a bunch of people who intellectually understand that they've been made new, that they've been given a new nature. So there are verses like in Ephesians 4 and 2 Corinthians 5:17. Paul talks about being made new. The old has passed away, the new has come. In Ephesians 4, he uses similar language, that we are new creations. And he defines that a bit further. So I think it's Ephesians 4:24. He says, and I'll paraphrase, that the new nature we're given as new creations is created in the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And so that's a really big deal.
Yeah.
And even Peter says in, I think it's 1 Peter 2:4, he talks about how we are partakers of the divine nature. And so you have people in the church everywhere who have been made new, and they've been given a new nature, and that they have been made righteous. They've been made holy, which that's probably 2 more episodes just defining that. Because righteousness is probably one of the most misunderstood but most important things that we could ever talk about.
Yeah.
It's just so unbelievably crucial to our existence, knowing that we are made righteous. But anyways, we'll save that for another time. Anyways, you've got these people in the church everywhere who have been made new, who may be ignorant to that fact. And because they haven't really been taught what it means or like what happens to you when you're made new, that you're actually given a new nature, that you're reborn, and that you have the potential to live the life that you were always designed to live and exist the way you were always designed to exist.
Right. You're not stuck being the person that you were before you met Jesus.
Yes.
And just, that's the only thing that's changed is that you know Jesus. Why would God make us in his image to not actually portray anything about him?
Right.
Like why would we be on the earth to be miserable human beings along with the rest of the world who doesn't know anything about Jesus?
Right.
Or doesn't want anything to do with him. There's a reason that he called us his kids, his children, so that we can display his characteristics, so that we can share his love, so that we can be a picture of who he was, who he is, who he always will be on earth now. Yeah.
There's the story in the Bible where Jesus is questioned by his disciples about paying taxes. And so they were like, well, Jesus, what's the deal? Like, do we still have to pay taxes to Rome? Like, are you going to set up your kingdom here in Israel to overthrow Rome? Like, when is that going to happen? Because that was what they thought he was going to do. And so he said, well, why don't you take out a coin? And so they got a coin. And he was like, all right, whose image is on that? And they were like, well, Caesar's image. He says, okay, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Then he goes on to say, and give to God what is God's. And he doesn't say this explicitly, but the implication is that if the coin belongs to Caesar because it bears his image, well, if we are to give to God what belongs to him, we have to be able to identify what bears his image. And that's us. We're the ones that bear his image.
Right. Every
Every other god that has been worshipped throughout history, I think I could say that. Maybe that's generally speaking, but they all had these like carved images of gold and wood or just whatever. But there are always images of all the other gods throughout history, except for our God. There's not an object that exists that bears his image because we're the ones that bear his image.
Wow. Yeah. That's powerful.
But I think a lot of people are unaware of just how new they are in Christ. And so if you're ignorant to that fact, then I don't really understand how anybody who doesn't have an awareness of that or knowledge of that, how they could pursue a life in which that appears to be true.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's hard and it's frustrating because once you begin to like really dive into the full nature of the gospel, you realize that the potential that we have to exhibit the newness of life that we've been given, to actually exhibit and portray through our behavior, the new nature we've been given, that potential is not really being lived up to.
Right.
And so our question is, okay, what can we do about that? Because back to again, the come full circle. We love parenting. We love parents. And this message is for everybody, not just parents.
Right.
But like, I want to be the best representation of Jesus to my kids that I can be.
Yes.
And I know you do too.
Yeah.
Right. And so because we understand that that's, at the end of the day, that's what they need.
Mm-hmm.
That's what they need from us. And so I want to be the best representation that I can be to them. And the only way that's going to happen is by allowing myself to be discipled by him, so that I will begin to learn how to act in accordance with who he says I am.
Right. Yeah. If we want to be a reflection of love to our kids, who is a better example of that than love himself?
Mm-hmm.
And so if that's what you want as a parent, then you need to be going after Jesus, and you need to be doing everything that you can, learning everything that you can to get as close to him and to know his heart the best you can, so that you can begin to understand why and how we're made in his image. And so that can become a reality in your life, because the only way that we can really bear his image is to understand his image. We can't just say like, I want to be like Jesus, and so that's what I'm going to do.
Right.
You know, I'm just going to act like Jesus.
I think I'm just going to be unconditionally kind today.
Yeah.
It's like, well, it doesn't really work like that.
Right.
Because you have kids and they're going to push all of the buttons that cause you to be unkind.
Right.
Yep. And so it's just not as simple as, oh, my kids need to be patient. I'll just be patient. The behavior is just an expression of what's happening internally.
Right.
And so the Father looks at us and he sees the finished work of Christ. He says, you're a new creation. Your old sinful nature has been put to death. And through discipline and through discipleship to my ways and my teachings, you will become a person who naturally exhibits my character, that you will portray my nature through your behavior.
Right.
But that requires deep internal transformation of our heart and our mind. And that's where discipleship to Jesus comes in.
Right.
Because we need to be sitting at his feet, learning from him and allowing him to bring restoration and order and transformation and healing to our minds and to our hearts and to our bodies. And to every part of us that is contributing to our behavior, especially the behavior that we want to see changed.
Right.
But can't just seem to do it on our own.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like any people that you spend time with, you know, like I remember growing up and even now, like with our own kids, I'm very aware of who they're spending their time with. And like our kids are so young that we have almost total control about who they're spending their time with, which is nice right now.
Yep.
But I remember like my mom being like, you know, making a big deal out of like my friends, like and who I chose to be friends with and who I chose to spend time with. And, you know, in the moment, it always kind of felt like, oh, Mom, like I'm not just going to be influenced by every, you know, person that I'm around. However, now that I'm on the other side of it, that's actually so true that like whoever you spend your time with, whoever you are being, well, I was going to say being influenced by, but you know, that's the main idea. But whoever you are allowing to speak into your life, whoever you are listening to and paying attention to, whoever you're spending your time with, you are going to start seeing their behaviors leak out of you, depending on how much time you actually invest in them and allow them to invest in your life.
Yep.
Because that's just this is how we work as humans. It seems is that like whatever we are giving our attention to, whatever we are allowing to speak into our lives, or whatever we're allowing our eyes to see and our ears to hear, those things get into our hearts and our minds, and then they circulate back out eventually.
Yeah.
And so those behaviors that we see in the people that we're spending time with will ultimately become our behaviors the more time that we spend with them. And so it's the same with Jesus, that if we're giving him our attention and our affection, the more that the more it will become natural for us to behave and to act like him.
Yeah. Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
And it's so important to stress that, like, the behavioral element of this transformational process is just a natural byproduct.
Yeah.
And so, you become like what you behold. And part of the problem is that there is so much distraction in our lives today. And the problem with distraction is that it divides our attention. And that's a problem because attention, I've heard it said that attention is the beginning of devotion. But I've come to realize that in between attention and devotion, there's awareness. And so because our attention is so divided, because we are too busy and we're too hurried and too distracted, our attention is divided. And so we're not giving Jesus the attention that he needs.
Right.
We're not giving the Holy Spirit the attention that he needs to actually begin the work. Well, he's begun the work, but to continue the work.
Yeah.
And so because we're not giving him the attention he needs, we are lacking awareness of him just in our daily lives.
Yeah.
We're lacking just an awareness of his presence with us and in us. And I do think we'll need to spend some time, though, talking about some of the practicality of actually implementing this in our lives. Because you and I have talked about, I think back towards the beginning, a couple episodes of the podcast, we talked maybe about like bridging the gap between the spirituality and the practicality.
Yes. Yeah.
Of really just life with Jesus and with parenting and of all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And there is a spiritual element, but there's also a practical element. And so I don't want to be contributing to the noise of telling people how they need to be.
Right.
But I want to be part of the solution of providing some practical ways that you can begin to undergo this internal transformation that is going to naturally produce the behavior that you are desiring to see, but struggling to maintain.
Right. Yeah. And really dissecting the steps that it takes to get there. Because it feels really daunting to be like, hey, act like Jesus. Because it's a pretty big goal.
Right. Yeah.
But when you can like dissect it and take it into those smaller steps that we mentioned before, it is a lot more attainable than it feels just saying, live like Jesus.
Right.
And really just allowing grace to just interweave the entire process is so, so important too.
Yeah.
Because there are going to be times that you mess up living like Jesus every single day.
Yeah. And it is a practice too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll end with this thought that being like Jesus first requires being with Jesus. And that's the starting place.
Yeah.
Is being with him and starting to, I think maybe in the next episode, we'll just talk about maybe some of the practicality of how our mind works and what are some things that we can do to start bringing our attention back to Jesus. Because I think that's the first step.
Yeah.
Is just giving him our attention. Being with him will lead to becoming like him. And often we want to be like him.
Right.
Without being with him. It's like it doesn't work that way.
Yep.
So yeah, let's call it for this episode.
Sounds good.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week with more gospel talk and more of just the practicality of how to go about experiencing internal transformation that is unto external behavioral transformation.
Yep.
But that's going to be all for this week. So once again, my name is Brian.
And I'm Katie.
And we're making history. We'll see you next time.